Hello, and thanks for joining us for Pact. P is for Peter. That is me. ACD is the lovely Miss Astronaut Cowboy Doctor, Master of Science here. Help us out by subscribing on YouTube, Spotify, or your favorite podcast service. Leave us comments. Also, leave glowing reviews on Audible and Apple Podcasts. Most importantly, tell your friends what we're doing here. Help us keep the lights on by becoming a patron at patreon.com/PeterCoffin. Your monthly support gets you into the Discord server, gets you exclusive content, and you see some content before everyone else. We stream 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every Saturday. Plan your weekends right with Theory Packed Saturdays. So for 5 years, I've done explicitly political videos and have made the observation that companies tend to use rhetoric which shifts blame for whatever problem that they're addressing onto individuals. And consumerism, as it is, consumer activism, buying more ethical products or changing your diet around in order to save the world is actually quite futile. It's the thing that they want us to do so that the responsibility is not theirs. Well, as it turns out, one of the bigger ones that you see this type of narrative with is climate change. And a study at Harvard University ended up showing exactly how. Now, I want to turn it over to you because you are the resident data analyst here.
Well, let me tell you what. So this article, and the article that we found this through was a Vox article, which very surprised that they're reporting on this.
Yes.
It's called ExxonMobil wants you to feel responsible for climate change so it doesn't have to. And the study that they are referring to is written by Supran and Oreskes in 2021. It was published in April of this year, so just last month. And it's called Rhetoric and Frame Analysis of ExxonMobil's Climate Change Communications. And so, just as a caveat, this is a deep learning, machine learning analysis that methodologically I am very much not familiar with. I'm more familiar doing that the old-fashioned human brain way.
Yeah.
So some of it is kind of dense. But basically what they have done is looked at 180 ExxonMobil communications, including their involvement in peer-reviewed articles, in internal company documents, and also in New York Times advertorials in which, they're doing sponsored content. It's Peter defined this earlier.
Sponsored content presented as an editorial.
Right. So I am going to just read the abstract. All right. So this paper investigates how ExxonMobil uses rhetoric and framing to shape public discourse on climate change. We present an algorithmic corpus comparison and machine learning topic model of 180 ExxonMobil climate change communications, including peer-reviewed publications, internal company documents, and advertorials in the New York Times. We also investigate advertorials using inductive frame analysis. We find that the company has publicly overemphasized some terms and topics while avoiding others. Most notably, they have used rhetoric of climate risk and consumer energy demand to construct a fossil fuel savior frame that downplays the reality and seriousness of climate change, normalizes fossil fuel lock-in, and individualizes responsibility. What they're doing sort of parallels what the tobacco industry has done, like we've recently talked about, in individualizing health-promoting behavior in the case of tobacco use, consumption choices, and a more general perspective in the case of climate change, to shift responsibility away from corporations. So, and then they just kind of tie that in, that parallel between the tobacco industry doing this and individualizing responsibility of smoking individuals to consumption choices as the underpinning cause of anthropogenic or human-caused global warming. The paper focuses on many different things. One of the things that the results focus on using this methodology of machine learning is, comparing different themes across different modalities. So they compare, what are the differences between the advertorial themes and between or between the advertorial themes and peer-reviewed papers and things like that. And then they kind of shift to a conversation about rhetoric. And within that conversation about rhetoric, there's a subsection that focuses on this individual responsibility discourse, which, if you've seen us talk at any time, that's what we're going to be focusing on today.
This is a very broad paper, and we're focusing on, again, the section of the paper that discusses something that we, in a lot of what we're talking about, is kind of a cornerstone of the analysis, which is that the demand side, the consumer side, the end user side is ultimately not the driving force in any changes to the world. Also, before we get going, I want to note how insane it is that there's such a significant number of New York Times advertorials from ExxonMobil that they can do analysis on it.
There were 65 that talked about that specific theme.
Advertorials.
So at least 65.
At least 65 New York Times advertorials. That is content that ExxonMobil paid the New York Times to print. Totally uncritical content. The fact that there's that many advertorials in the New York Times, think about it. Like, just not even like by ExxonMobil, but just that there are that many in the New York Times. Just like people can pay the New York Times to run something that looks like an article, but is an advertisement. It's gross.
So the first major point that they come to, and specifically talking about ExxonMobil's role in this individualized responsibility discourse in climate change, is that they're disproportionately using terms that are demand focused on the consumer for energy. So, for example, they're focusing on consumption as the cause of fossil fuel production, greenhouse gas emissions, and ultimately human-based global warming instead of supply-side factors like oil, coal, gas, that ExxonMobil
industry.
Is. Right. Industrial, the three main fossil fuel factors that we're dependent on here.
And to add something to that, when you talk about like consumer side usage of fuel, a large part of that is because of the transportation system that's been set up. It's fully individualized. You're driving a car, you're not taking a bus, and you're driving a car that uses gasoline. For all intents and purposes, they've set it up to go that way.
So let's just give a few examples of how they do this. And a phrase that they use quite often is, energy demand. We have this growing demand that over time we're going to have we're going to have to meet. And it also kind of capitalizes on the same like overpopulation.
It's so funny, isn't it?
It is all so like intimately connected with one another. An example that they use from 2008 of this energy demand rhetoric is by 2030, global energy demand will be about 30% higher than it is today. And oil and natural gas will be called upon to meet the world's energy requirements. So sort of one, presenting fossil fuels as an inevitable need to operate on, but also indicating demand as the driver of that need.
Yes.
Just like in every other industry that has this 18-year-old, I took one economics course understanding of how things operate. Right. The more people want energy, the more we have to supply it, and we're just responsible for that demand. Yeah. And that's how price also works. Yeah. Rather than being just fucking plucked from the sky like that.
Yeah, and so you end up with a situation where they're saying, like, when you turn the lights on, you are causing demand. Mm-hmm. And everybody has to turn the lights on every single night if they want to see at night. And unfortunately, that just creates a demand that we inevitably have to fill. And at the moment, we have to fill that with fossil fuels.
They also do this thing where they connect increased energy demand with prosperity.
Yes.
Very frequently. Saying, in developed countries, we're already doing this, and we're going to have a higher demand for more energy needs that thus necessitates greater use of fossil fuel availability. but also in developing countries, if we want them to thrive and become viable on their own,
that demand can go up, up, up.
That demand is just going to go up, and we need to do that for the sake of these developing countries so that they can thrive independently.
Very woke. Very woke. This was the exact quote. As populations and economies have grown, energy use has increased, and so have greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah. So the second thing that they bring up as a major point is that the extent that the advertorials admit that we have to reduce human-generated global warming, but in doing so by focusing on this sort of consumer activist lens. So this says they disproportionately introduce terms conveying individual or, again, demand-side actions as an appropriate response. So while this inevitable thing exists that we have to use, we just have to be reliant on fossil fuels. If you do your part, we can beat this. That's what they do.
It is. That's what it is, though.
That's what it is. And so even while promoting explicit doubt on the reality of this in the past, in particular, which the article focuses on earlier, advertorials focus on downstream energy efficiency and greenhouse gas emissions rather than upstream supply of fossil fuels as the appropriate target for mitigating climate change.
If you have ever seen an article in like a publication that says like why you should be using LED light bulbs, that's what we're talking about. That's most likely an advertorial of some kind. Like why you should use, X green technology, why you should have solar panels on your roof, why you should blank. It doesn't matter. This is the type of advertorial they're talking about. Like these persuasive language type seemingly editorials, which are again telling you that you need to change your behaviors because of climate change or because of pollution or because of whatever thing that they're claiming that your actions have specific input on. Like another example to go outside of fossil fuels was the whole plastic straw thing, where plastic straws account for literally 0.025%, like 2.5% of a percent of the plastic in the ocean. You have to change your behaviors to change the ocean, which you will not meaningfully. Well, you could take every single plastic straw out of the ocean. It would have no meaningful effect on the ocean.
The authors early in the paper specifically invoke the concept of greenwashing from corporations and how that just completely deflects responsibility and their integral role, nearly exclusive role in terms of collaboratively contributing to climate change. So this, a 2007 advertorial here offered readers simple steps to consider, including being smart about electricity use, heating and cooling your home efficiently, improving your gas mileage, checking your home's greenhouse gas emissions, using an online calculator, which could you imagine just a normal fucking person reading that?
Yeah, I know.
It's just like somebody who has economic precarity to resolve in, putting bread on the table, going to your job, taking care of children. Why aren't you using an online calculator to see how that's all adding up?
Yeah, exactly. Could you please keep track of your expenses and energy usage in various ways for the next month or so and put it into this fucking calculator?
So we can deflect the responsibility, the integral responsibility that we have in global warming and put that on you, even though what you do is absolutely fuck all compared to what we're contributing.
Inconsequential.
Can you please do that so we can continue facilitating this public narrative that rad libs and all these well-meaning leftist identifying people are going to glom onto while siding with Exxon Mobil?
Why, if we just all became vegans.
Stop. I can't. So the important thing about this is that they frame themselves as being aligned, even though historically, like pre-2000 in the 20th century, they frame themselves as being aligned with the cause of like remediating climate change by focusing on what we can do to remediate this problem.
Which prior they cast doubt on the science as their primary mode of avoiding responsibility.
They implicate themselves as partnering with, cleaner technologies to use energy more efficiently.
Wind and solar are intermittent. And therefore, when there isn't any wind and there are clouds out, you have to have a backup. And that's more or less ExxonMobil's business plan in the green energy sector, is being the backup.
Right.
You have a cloudy day, you have no wind, you need natural gas, right? There's still an energy demand to fill.
It's almost like the same dynamic of like the industrial reserve army.
Yes, very much so.
But like with energy forms or energy modalities, like you always have this thing that we have to fall back on when this one thing doesn't work.
100%.
So we'll conclude this section by just reading their conclusive statement on it. It says, in sum, ExxonMobil's advertorial statistically overused terms that reduce anthropogenic global warming to a downstream problem caused by a consumer energy demand to be solved primarily by energy efficiency to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and I'll add into extrapolating from other parts of the article, rather than focusing on their own supply side contributions.
And what the fuck have we been saying on this goddamn podcast repeatedly? It's not you. It is them. It is capital. It is, like, we've brought this statistic up before. 71% of the world's emissions come from 100 companies. Now, as Alex pointed out in our degrowth episode, there is economies of scale, and simply dismantling those companies doesn't dismantle all of that. Like, you have to change your supply side process in order to do anything about that. But the power is held unaccountably by 71 companies. They can do whatever the fuck they want. They make all the choices. That's their thing. And when they use this kind of rhetoric, what they're more or less doing is changing it so that you're not thinking about it that way. You're thinking about it in terms of what you can do.
Which is fuck all.
Which it's fuck all. To bring up the plastic straw thing again, that was such a huge push in the media. There were so many, probably advertorials, that were telling us why we can't use plastic straws, which in no way accounts for a meaningful amount of plastic in the ocean. 40% of the plastic in the ocean is discarded fishing nets.
Yeah.
It would be so easy to change that with supply side behavior. If you don't leave any fishing nets in the ocean, then 40% of the plastic in the fucking ocean isn't fishing nets. It's that simple. And that has nothing to do with you. You don't wake up and go, oh man, I'm going to go put some fishing nets in the fucking ocean.
I don't know. I do that. I work about 100 hours a week dedicating my life to health and equity research. But you know what? There are 168 hours in a week. And so the other 68 hours I spend purchasing fishing nets and throwing them directly into the ocean.
Yeah. Driving to the ocean in like a Range Rover.
Yeah.
Something big that really puts out some carbon.
Oh, no. Nobody believes that I can drive a big car. Well,
That's true.
I guess
That's
you
fair.
can't see my height. I am a tiny person.
Yeah. 5'2".
Yeah.
Very small.
And I get very afraid of driving large vehicles.
Other situations, great height though.
Anyway, this article is, I want to kind of talk about the way that they present their article as novel in their discussion and its general contribution to the literature. Oh, that's supplemental material. Energy demand rhetoric individualizes anthropogenic global warming responsibility. Two dimensions of issue responsibility are commonly identified in communications and psychological research: causality and treatment. Causality responsibility addresses the source of a problem, who or what causes it. Treatment responsibility identifies who or what has the power to alleviate the problem and should be held responsible for doing so. Studies of responsibility framing and attribution theory argue that attribution of these responsibilities broadly takes two conflicting forms: individual versus social. Now, I'm not going to read exactly what they say on this, but ExxonMobil's presentation of this is obviously individualizing responsibility by focusing on energy demand rhetoric, this demand side rather than supply side contributions to the problem that we're talking about. It distinguishes how consumer energy is presented to the public and thus shapes not only this like layperson popular narrative that we experience of doing your part to resolve climate change, but also even in peer-reviewed literature, which is also, I think, more broadly a lesson in how corporations influence the body of science.
Absolutely.
Peer-reviewed.
Because they can provide funding for it.
Yeah.
And this is why when we talk about self-identifying leftists, socialists, or even communists, when you start seeing them talking about like, you should do this thing, like you should eat vegan or you should drive less or whatever, like these types of things are oriented towards the same place ultimately for the responsibility that ExxonMobil is angling its rhetoric at. Like, is it really that effective when you hear a leftist telling you, oh yeah, you need to change your consumption habits in order to change the world? It's no, it's not. They're doing the work of the ExxonMobil project for them. Ultimately, in a lot of cases, because they have read these advertorials and this peer-reviewed research, and they come in, yeah, but you still need to do your part. No, your part.
Why can't it be both?
Why can't it be both? Yes, why can't it be both is a big one.
Because they do it's like they're using the Luxembourg Revolution and Reform thing.
Yeah.
But with consumer activism.
Yeah.
Which is insane.
Won't both things progress us? And it's like, all right, fine. Let's accept the assertion that both things will progress us. Are you going to ride a bike from here to fucking California? Or are you going to fly there? You're not going to fucking ride the bike unless you're insane. Like, there are insane people that do shit like that, but it's going to take you for fucking ever. And there's a good chance that the reason you want to be in California will be over by the time you get there.
In any case, ExxonMobil, and again, this is just one entity that we're focusing on, and just 180 pieces of communication. ExxonMobil, as an example, is using this simultaneous reliance and narrative of absolute necessity of their product, while also saying, while this is inevitable, the only way that we can remediate these concerns is through individual action, which is comparatively fuck all, as empirically supported. And that's what we really want to focus on here, is just the use of media among corporations to deflect responsibility from themselves when they are the real implicants in these things towards consumers so that they continue operating and profiting off of their own industry while dividing the working class on
Absolutely.
the issue.
Absolutely. Because look at the result of that type of rhetoric. Look at how many people are arguing over consumption and how bad your consumption is.
And
how
just putting that on you to consume better.
Which, by the way, if you're in a certain income bracket, you are not likely.
You don't give a fuck.
Yeah, you are very unlikely to be able, to even bother with. And that automatically banishes you to the basket of deplorables. I mean, out of all of the times that people have taken a shit on me for making this exact fucking point, there's now Harvard fucking research that is,
very much motivated by a liberal agenda.
It's not even like, you can't even call it communist. It is.
Oh my God, no.
No.
It's completely antithetical to the things that we talk about all the time. And even they are presenting research and publishing research on.
Yeah. It is in the framework of liberalism, and they are simply just acknowledging the material reality of what these companies are doing. So when you start from that framework, what is the solution? It has to be understanding that the supply side is where the changes have to be made. So how do you make those changes? when everything is unaccountably owned.